Hey, Pretty Girl Club. Welcome back to the Decentering Men series. Happy New Year! I hope you guys are planning your goals for 2025. So, I'm recording this right now because after this, I have to get my outfits together because I'm going out with my friends tonight. But welcome back to the Decentering Men series. I want to talk to you about how to grieve and kind of the grieving process that comes along with decentering men because a lot of feminism content creators, a lot of decentering men content creators, they tell you to decenter men, but they don't really tell you about the psychological aftermath that comes once you truly go on that decentering men journey. So let's say you decide to take a break from dating. Maybe you delete your dating apps. Maybe you break up with your boyfriend or something, or you decide to just be single. I feel like there actually is almost like this grieving process that some women go through. And this is especially for the women who grew up male centered, especially if you had maybe a pick me mother, women who come from religious backgrounds, all of these things that you might have grown up on, like Disney Channel and stuff like that. All of those things have been brainwashing you to look at a romantic relationship as the pinnacle of success. Because if you look at our culture, a lot of times what they'll talk about is leveling up. They'll tell women to level up. Why? So you can get a man. So you can get a rich man. That's why you level up. Or they'll tell you to lose weight because XYZ type of man likes this type of woman. So a lot of times you don't realize it, but you're subconsciously being brainwashed into viewing romantic relationships as a prize. And so a part of your decentering men journey is going to be no longer viewing romantic relationships as the pinnacle of success and learning how to receive emotional validation outside of a romantic context. Because another thing that happens too in our culture is a lot of women prioritize romantic relationship over friendship. They prioritize it over networking types of relationships. They just prioritize romance as kind of like their number one thing that they invest emotional labor into. But I feel like a part of the reason why women have a hard time decentering men or view it, they view it as radical. I think part of that is because when you decide to decenter men, you actually are deciding to no longer prioritize something that you spent decades pouring your emotional labor into. I mean, think about it. It takes a lot of emotional labor to go through the dating process, to have a boyfriend, to fix your relationship problems, to communicate with him, and then to break up with him. And, all of that romance and that romantic history that you might have had, that took a lot of emotional labor. And for those of you who have been single your whole lives, even single women actually spend a lot of their mental energy thinking about men, having limerence over men, or doing things for the male gaze. And so once you decide to decenter men as a whole, you also are realizing all of the wasted energy, all of the time that you spent wasting your thoughts on some guy that's never going to text you back. So I think that's a part of the reason why some women, they kind of go through this grieving process because they're realizing that this ideal that they put all of this emotional labor into, it doesn't actually exist. And when I say it doesn't exist, what I mean is the whole concept of a Prince Charming. No matter what man you get with, he's going to have flaws that you will have to deal with for the rest of your life. So I feel like a lot of content creators, they sometimes brush over that. But a part of the decentering men journey is realizing that no matter who you're with, he's going to have flaws. You're going to be dealing with those flaws. Whether he has physical flaws, maybe he's ugly or something, maybe he's perfect, but he's physically ugly. Okay, so that's still a flaw that you have to deal with because you have to sleep with a guy that you consider to be physically repulsive. So that's a flaw. So it's realizing that this ideal that you've been sold about the Prince Charming, that it's all a lie, that it's basically fantasy. So I think that's one of the main reasons women go through a grieving process. It's because they're realizing that they've spent their lives chasing after a fantasy. They've spent their lives club hopping and bar hopping and moving cities, also they can search for this unicorn man. They've spent their lives running around in circles trying to find a needle in a haystack. And so I think that's a part of the initial grief that some women may experience. But I'm here to tell you that it doesn't have to just be a grieving process because the good thing is, guess what? Now, all of that emotional energy that you used to spend searching for this unicorn guy, you get to take all of your power back. You get to take all of that emotional energy back and get to know yourself. So instead of focusing on, oh, what kind of text message can I send him? What types of vetting questions do I have to ask him? What are 21 questions I should ask Tyrone before we go on a date? What are all the questions I should ask Scott? Okay, instead of worrying about that, you actually can ask yourself those questions and get to know yourself. What are my dreams and desires? What are my emotional triggers? What are my toxic traits? So instead of acting like a therapist for a man, you actually get to spend time acting like a therapist for yourself. You get to go on your own healing journey. So that's one of the benefits of decentering men. A lot of women who have decentered men, they spend more time on their own emotional healing and, kind of overcoming the PTSD that comes from dealing with men. By the way, I do believe in a such thing as relationship PTSD. I just made that phrase up. I don't know if that's a real psychology term, but I call it relationship PTSD because a lot of women who are male-centered, they end up traumatizing themselves in the dating market, kind of interacting with all these guys. Maybe they've been pumped and dumped or ghosted or abused or whatever. So all of those micro traumas build up over time until you have full-blown PTSD. And so one of the positive things about a decentering men journey is, first of all, you're no longer going to have any more micro traumas from men because you're choosing to kind of separate yourself from them. And by the way, I do believe that decentering men exists on a spectrum. So some women will choose to be child-free. I view that as a form of decentering men because men are usually the main ones who want to build their quote-unquote legacy. So that's a form of decentering men. Maybe choosing not to be married. That's another way that you can decenter men. Or maybe choosing to not be in relationships at all. Or maybe you're choosing to only date men who are like very, very wealthy. So, you're eliminating 99% of the male population. All of those different things are ways of decentering men. So what you're doing is you're freeing up your time now because now your phone is not going to be clogged up and flooded with all these dusty men or, flooded with all these men that you're not interested in. But I think that for a lot of women, their desire to have this happily ever after, it is rooted in emotional wounds. A lot of women only get married because they want to feel special. They want to feel like they've been picked. If you think about like the wedding day and just kind of the culture around marriage and weddings, all of it is about making that bride feel special, right? So for a lot of women who have spent their lives feeling invisible or feeling like they're not special, marriage is that one thing, it's that one pinnacle that can make her feel very special, especially if she marries her quote unquote dream guy. So it could be maybe an attractive guy or, whatever guy she puts on a pedestal, that guy has the power to make her feel special. So I think that sometimes the reason that women don't want to decenter men is because they feel like if they don't get married, then somehow they're not special. And a lot of those women, they really only wanted marriage so they could heal their own emotional wounds. It's really a form of emotional codependency. A lot of women have the fear of abandonment. So they have a fear of being left. They have a fear of being alone. And they think that being married means you won't be alone. They think that being married means you won't feel abandoned. And anybody who's ever been married or divorced can tell you that being married, it doesn't change a man. It doesn't mean that you'll never be lonely. In fact, one of the worst feelings ever is to be sleeping next to someone and still feeling alone. So I'm sure a lot of women here can relate to that. And that's because a lot of men are just emotionally unavailable in general. But one of the ways that you can find healing after going through kind of this grieving process with decentering men is by addressing your fear of rejection. So recognizing that even these women who are married or they're in these relationships, it doesn't mean that they're not being rejected by their partner. They could be getting rejected by their own husband every single night when he chooses to go look at porn instead of sleeping with her. That's actually a form of rejection. That is actually a form of abandonment. That's a form of emotional abandonment and sexual abandonment. Also, porn trains men to separate sex from emotional connection. So that's also another red flag. If your husband, if your man, if he doesn't really believe in having sex with an emotional connection, he may devalue having an emotional connection with you. And so being able to kind of go back and dissect a lot of the relationships and marriages you looked up to, that's another thing that you can actually ask yourself. Whose relationship did I look up to? And then I want you to study that person's relationship and study the truth. Find out the truth about that person's relationship. So for example, if there is a certain Disney princess that you looked up to? So, for example, like Aladdin, the Princess Jasmine. Princess Jasmine, if I remember the story correctly, I believe she was wealthy, and Aladdin was like a thief. So he was basically a dusty and a thief. So a lot of that childhood brainwashing is teaching women that it's okay to be in love with a man who's, maybe got a criminal history or he does these bad things because, oh, he has a good heart. So one of the things that you can do on your decentering men journey is going back and dissecting your favorite love movies, your favorite romance stories, your favorite Disney princesses, or even your own parents' marriage, and kind of asking yourself, now that I'm more mature and now that I understand my emotional needs and desires, would this type of relationship have met my emotional needs? Because in a lot of cases, it doesn't. A lot of women, they are more in love with the idea of love rather than men themselves. And you know what? A lot of men will tell you this, and a lot of women will tell you this as well, because it's true. These women who are still male centered, they're really just centered around kind of like this fantasy or dream that they had about this man. They've centered their lives around an ideal. So a part of the grieving process with decentering men is you're not just grieving not being with a man or something like that. No, you're actually letting go of what your initial views of family meant to you. Maybe you're letting go of your initial views on what a healthy relationship looks like or kind of the construct of marriage. So you're starting to question these things that you've always been taught. And you've been taught to never question those things. In fact, a lot of people will shame women if they say they don't want marriage. They'll call you a whore for not wanting marriage. Have you ever noticed that Madonna whore complex in this patriarchal society? So you're either a wife and a mother or you're a whore. There is no in between. But another one of the toxic reasons why a lot of male-centered women want marriage and stuff like that is because they are clingy. So they hold on to relationships tightly, even when those relationships are toxic or unfulfilling. And that's because they have a fear of being disconnected. They have a fear of feeling isolated. And for some women, they also have this FOMO. They have the fear of missing out. So that's actually a part of the grieving process for some women who used to be male-centered. They feel like by decentering men that they are experiencing FOMO, like somehow they're missing out on happily ever after, or somehow they're just missing out on a certain aspect of men that they've never seen before. But here in the Pretty Girl Club, we are very pretty privileged women over here, and we're not afraid to say it. And so a lot of us have had a lot of romantic relationships. A lot of us over here have been around all different kinds of men. And we can tell you that no, there is no idealized, perfect Prince Charming that has no flaws. Every man you come across will have toxic traits. There's no such thing as a human being that has no toxic traits whatsoever. If a person tries to say that they have no toxic traits, that person's toxic trait is that they are a narcissist. Narcissists have a hard time taking accountability for their flaws. But another part of your decentering men journey is for some women, they end up having difficulty trusting. So maybe you feel reluctant to trust men or, and that's totally understandable if you have PTSD. What I trust is my gender studies that I've done. I trust the statistics about men. So instead of me just listening to a random man's words or listening to random male YouTube channels, I like to look at statistics. I like to look at reality. So that's something else that can help you along your decentering men journey. It is actually looking at the statistics. What percentage of men cheat? What percentage of men actually make over 100K per year? It's less than 20%. What percentage of men date outside of their race? For those of you who are Black women who date outside of the Black community, it's a lower percentage. So actually tapping into reality, that will help you along your journey because, like I said, you won't be running in circles looking for a needle in a haystack, looking for some magical white man, some magical white Prince Charming or something to come sweep you off your feet. And another thing, too, is that for a lot of women, a part of why they are in a grieving process is because they've realized that they have put their whole life on pause. So maybe she never bought a house because she was waiting until her husband found her. She never moved to the city she wanted to move to because she was hoping that a man would come along and marry her and protect and provide for her, and then she'd be able to move to the city she wants to live in. So for a lot of women, they're not grieving just the relationships with men. They are grieving the fact that they've wasted their lives. That's really what it is. They're grieving the fact that they've wasted their time. They're grieving the fact that they put their life on pause for something that doesn't actually exist. or for something that's so rare that it's not worth putting your life on pause for. So a lot of women, they actually put their dreams and goals on the back burner because they've been taught by men or they've been taught by male-centered women that you need to prioritize marriage first. That should be your first priority. So don't go get a degree. Don't go and do anything with your life. You need to go find a man. And so if a woman has spent 20, 30, 40 years searching for a man and she never did anything else in her life, she never had any other accomplishments, that could be very devastating to her because she realizes that she's just been chasing after the wind this whole time. And so the first solution to kind of getting through this grieving process is to start prioritizing non-romantic aspects of your life. So start embracing, you can actually romanticize your life. You can romanticize yourself. And what I mean by that is whatever you were expecting a man to do for you, do that for yourself. So if you've spent your life wishing that a man would pay for you to get a new dress and take you to a nice restaurant, get yourself a new dress and take yourself to a nice restaurant. Because one of the things that male-centered women don't understand is that a man cannot love you better than you can love yourself. He can't, because a man doesn't live inside your head. He doesn't live inside of your thoughts. He doesn't know every thought you're thinking. He doesn't have all of your memories. He doesn't have all of those nostalgic feelings that you have. So no one in this world knows you better than you. This channel is a big proponent of self-trust. I talk a lot about that. That's why I tell you guys that I don't consider myself an advice channel, because you know yourself better than I know you. And the same is true for your romantic relationships. So whatever you were expecting to have in a man, become that. Because a lot of women, they end up chasing after these men because those men exude qualities that she wishes she had. So for example, a lot of poor women, of course they want a rich man. Why? Because she's not rich. So of course she wants a man that's as rich as possible because she herself felt like maybe she couldn't attain that level of wealth without a man, or she felt like it would be easier with a man. And by the way, I beg to differ. I think that in a lot of cases, even if a man is providing, it is not emotionally easy to be around a man. You cannot convince me that it's emotionally easy and emotionally healthy and everything's just so perfect and lollipops and great and he just acts like an ATM and you have to give nothing in return. No, it is not emotionally easy to be around a man or to depend on a man financially. And I've said this before, a man is not a plan. We know statistically that men come and go. He's not yours, it's just your turn. You know how they try to project that onto women? Yeah, I'm keeping the same energy on this channel. So he's not yours, it's just your turn. So just because a man is here today, it doesn't mean he'll be here tomorrow. It doesn't mean that he's still going to stay around after you gain weight or after you have the babies or after he gets tired of you. And so something that can help you to overcome the grief stage is to realize that you're actually practicing self-preservation by decentering men. So decentering men is really just a stronger form of boundaries. That's how I view it. I view decentering men as having stronger emotional boundaries in particular, because this is where a lot of men end up kind of trapping women and getting them codependent. It's through their emotions. Disney Channel, that taps into a little girl's emotions. If you think of maybe receiving validation and stuff, that taps into a woman's emotions. A man can tap into your abandonment wounds, or, let's say you don't feel seen. If a man compliments you and you have never felt seen before, he's actually tapping into that wound that you have of feeling invisible. So a lot of men, they can manipulate you with their words, and a lot of them will even lie, or they'll do this thing called future faking. And the women who fall for that are the women with abandonment issues. So she feels more stable now because he said that he's going to marry her. He said that he wants to be with her. He said that he's going to get her a ring. So those types of women, he's tapping into her abandonment issues. He's soothing that part of her. And this is also why I talk a lot about having an internal locus of control, because you don't ever want anybody else to be able to control or influence your emotional state. But it's really important to remember that the most important relationship that you will ever have in your life is the relationship with yourself. You wake up with yourself, you go to sleep with yourself, everywhere you go, there you are. And so a lot of women who get into these relationships, they end up practicing self-abandonment. They abandon themselves so that they can mold and form and shape themselves for this rich man that they married, or, they change their personalities, or they change their appearance, or whatever. They change all these things so that they can be this man's ideal. And we all know that men are fickle. Historically, men are fickle, not just in terms of beauty standards. I mean, look at how the beauty standards change. Look at how all the trends change. Look at how a lot of men are not even monogamous. Don't even get me started. As a matter of fact, I should do a video. Can you guys remind me to do a video on the monogamy scale, like the non-monogamy scale, and how a lot of men, they say they're monogamous, but they actually mean something else. What they really mean is they're monogamous when they're with you. As soon as you leave that room, or as soon as he goes on his Instagram or looks online, he has no problem lusting after those women, DMing those women, because he doesn't view the internet as real. He doesn't view social media as real. So that's a whole other rabbit hole that we can go down. But something you want to ask yourself is, are you one of those people who used to view non-romantic love as being less? So maybe you devalued friendships, you devalue family relationships, but a romantic relationship, that's on a pedestal. That's the most important. That's the most fulfilling one. If you think romantic relationships are more fulfilling than all of your other relationships, that's a sign of being male-centered. And so I think that a part of why women go through grief when they are decentering men is because she is having an identity shift. She was male-centered. She used to center her whole identity, maybe her internal beauty standard, her self-image, her personality, her skills, her talents, where she lives. She used to center all of these things around a man. And so for a lot of women, they're going through this limbo phase because they're asking themselves, who am I without a man? So that's a question that you can reflect on. That will help you. Asking yourself, who am I without a man? Who am I outside of dating this rich man? Who am I as a single woman? Do I even like being single? Do I even like being by myself? And why is it that I view being single as being by myself? That's another thing too that always bothered me, is when single women would say like, oh, I'm by myself. It's like, well, why is it that you're only by yourself because you're single? Do you not have friends or family? And if not, why not? Like, why is it that some women, they don't prioritize their family members or their friends or making female friends, but suddenly when it comes to a man, they'll talk to him on the phone for 6 hours. They will risk their jobs. They'll be talking on the phone at work, risking getting a write-up at work or risking losing their financial stability. Some women will quit their jobs. They'll move across the country for a man. And so when you go from that level of codependency to finally having that sense of autonomy, it's very scary for a lot of women because now she has to reconstruct her entire identity. She has to try to figure out who she is. But that's actually good. That's a very good thing. That's very powerful to figure out who you are. But one thing that you can do if you are in your grieving process is you can do journal prompts and stuff. So in the Patreon, if you guys join my Patreon, we do have a Decentering Men section in our Discord. I talk about different journal prompts all the time in there. But what you can do is you can start to kind of journal about your emotions. You can track yourself. You can kind of track your growth. You can start to write down the things that you love about yourself as opposed to seeking that validation from a man or seeking that love from a man. A lot of women seek love from a man because she is not able to give herself that kind of love. She's not able to build wealth on her own. She's not able to get a house on her own. There are all these things that maybe she's not able to do. Go on trips, go to Turks and Caicos, go on a private jet, whatever her dreams are. Women who are super male-centered, sometimes they're waiting around for a guy to give them access to that part of their life. Basically, they're waiting for a guy to come in and change their life. In fact, they even have a saying, a lot of women, they actually talk about maybe dating for lifestyle and stuff like that. And I do agree that if you are dating, it should enhance your lifestyle. But at the same time, when you're single and when that guy leaves, you don't want your lifestyle to go down. So one thing you can ask yourself if you are in the grieving process and you're decentering men, you can ask yourself, how has your relationship with men shaped your identity and your self-worth over the years? So for example, have you been one of those women where you used to always view yourself through the male gaze? Like, oh, men like big booties, so I'm going to have a big booty even though I want to be super skinny. That's an example of viewing yourself through a man's eyes as opposed to viewing yourself through your own eyes. So how has your relationship with men shaped your identity and your self-worth? How much of your self-worth comes from men? A lot of the reason why some women are so depressed or they think that decentering men is so radical and they can't do it, well, it's because their self-worth comes from what white men think of them. That's why they will comment on my channel and then they'll say, well, white men prefer black women with 4C hair. Or they'll say, like, well, men prefer a woman who has a butt and boobs. And that's because the male gaze has shaped her identity and her self-worth. The male gaze has shaped her view of her own body. That's why she feels like, this is what makes me sexy because men like it. So that's part of the reason why some women are grieving, but you may want to reflect on that if you are grieving. How has your relationship with men shaped your identity and your self-worth? By the way, I'm not just talking about romantic relationships with men. When I'm talking about decentering men on this channel, I'm talking about decentering your father, your uncles, your brothers, grandpa and them, your boss at your job who's a man, anybody who you allowed to influence your perception of yourself in the past. Because I've also noticed that a lot of women, so I can use the divestors, for example, a lot of black women who say they hate black men or they don't like black men, a lot of that actually starts with PTSD from their own black fathers. So that is still a form of being male-centered because your entire emotional state has been dysregulated to the point of PTSD because of a man. So that's still male-centered. So the male may be your father. The man that you could have centered your identity around, it could have been your brother. It could have been an uncle or maybe a teacher or a coach in high school. But that's something that you want to ask yourself is, what men have had the biggest influence over my identity? Which men have had the biggest influence on my self-image? Is it rappers or NBA players? Because I hear a lot of women, they would talk about them as well. Like, oh, who does this celebrity guy talk to? Or like, all these NBA guys, they date these non-black women. Okay, so they have an NBA player-centered identity. So they view themselves as less than or as suffering from an ism because the man that they centered their identity around, which is a rich black man or a rich athlete, he is not choosing them. So remember how I said this goes back to those abandonment issues? Some women only want relationships really so that they feel picked. They want to feel like they've been picked. They want to feel like they are special. So that NBA player, he has the power to make her feel special. So that's still a form of an external locus of control. Because if you are equating a man's dating preferences to some sort of ism or like I'm being marginalized because these guys on dating apps won't date me, or dating apps are racist because white men, they're swiping past me and stuff. Okay, so that means that you have a male-centered self-image. So your self-image is really based on like what these white men on dating apps think of you. So that's a good question to ask yourself. Which men or which group of men have had the biggest influence over my identity and my life? Is it black men, white men? Is it the Johnson men? Let's say your family name is Johnson or something. The Johnson men. So maybe your dad, your grandpa, your uncles, maybe they have shaped your identity. And then you have to go back and kind of deconstruct their images of you because, part of the reason why I didn't wear like makeup and a lot of weaves and all that when I was growing up was because of my father's influence. My father, he didn't like stuff like that. So he discouraged it. I mean, he literally viewed it as fake. And so that's a part of what shaped my identity to the point where I was like, okay, I have to always be natural or as natural as possible because natural is better. But in reality, that whole mindset of natural being better, that actually came from the male gaze in my case. And so the male gaze, it doesn't just mean romantic. It could also mean your own father or your own brother. Did your brother make fun of you? Did your brother ever talk bad about your talents and gifts? Maybe you had a passion for something and your brother laughed at you, or maybe your uncles told you like, oh, you can't dance, you can't sing, you can't paint, you can't draw. So they kind of influenced your personal identity. That is still a form of being male-centered. So for those of you who say, oh, I'm a family-oriented person, okay, is your family matriarchal or patriarchal? Because if you come from a patriarchal family and you are a family-oriented woman, there's a high possibility that you are also a male-centered woman. If men are the ones who kind of run your family, or if the male gaze or whatever dad wants, whatever grandpa wants, if that runs the family and you are family oriented, you're more likely to be male centered because maybe a man was in charge in your family. This is actually why a lot of men say that they prefer women who come from patriarchal families where the dad is the head of the household. Well, yeah, that's because he wants you to model that with him. He wants a woman that's quote unquote submissive. So that's why he's saying that. So it's still kind of like a form of being male-centered. So that's something else to ask yourself. Another thing that you can reflect on during your grieving process is, what are the specific ways that I have centered men in my life? So, for example, romantic relationships. Have you ever moved across the city or across the state or to a new country because of a man? Have you ever spent up your savings because of a man? Have you ever pawned something at the pawn shop? Maybe you sell your stereo, you sell your TV to help a man pay his bills when you were younger. So that's an example of centering your finances around a man. Maybe you've centered your sexuality around men. This is something that I hear some women talking about. So maybe you do not receive sexual pleasure when you're sleeping with a guy, but like you've always kept silent, or you just pretend you're faking orgasms and stuff like that. So maybe you have centered men when it comes to the bedroom, or you're doing stuff in the bedroom with him not because you like it, not because you get any pleasure out of it, not because you want to even do that stuff for him, but you're doing it because maybe he has pressured you, or following a man's sexual timeline as opposed to following your own. So maybe having sex when you're not comfortable sleeping with him, or maybe even like allowing a man to pressure you into a relationship, or you get into a marriage with a man even though you didn't want to get married, but maybe he values marriage a lot more than you. Also, another thing that you can ask yourself is, if you're grieving, is what feelings come up when you think about decentering men? Are you scared? Are you relieved? Are you angry? Are you sad and disappointed? So, for example, one of the feelings that I felt was actually feeling relieved and feeling powerful. But as far as negative emotions, I would say initially there's a sense of disappointment that I felt, because I felt like I had spent my life being lied to. I felt like I was lied to by Christianity, by Disney movies, by maybe even friends and family. And I'm not saying all those people lied on purpose, but I just feel like society, the society that we live in is not an honest society. This is why a lot of people, I don't care what they say about this YouTube channel when they say, oh, you guys shouldn't focus on that, or you guys are manipulating, you guys are cosplaying by trying to be pretty and all this stuff. That's dishonest. Kind of changing your appearance or wearing makeup, all this stuff you're doing is dishonest. Social climbing is dishonest. And it's like, okay, well, since when do we live in an honest society? We don't. And so a part of my journey with decentering men was realizing that the society that I live in and the media that I've been taking in is full of lies. All of those songs that I used to listen to by Chris Brown and Drake, talking about wifing up a woman or being in love with a woman or F around and give you my last name, all of these lyrics and stuff on these songs that I was listening to, for me, it was about realizing that those things are actually a lie. Those men are lying, because if they were really telling the truth, wouldn't those singers actually be married and they would have no problem getting married? No, they're just trying to sell a product. They're selling a fantasy, and it made them rich. Or the label, the record label, it made them rich. Same thing with Disney. They're selling a product to you. So they don't have to be honest. Sales are definitely not about honesty. That's about putting your best foot forward. It's about trying to make money when you are selling something. And if you think about the industry, or just human beings in general, human beings don't want reality. They want fantasy. They want something that they can escape into. They want something that makes them feel like they're escaping and feeling like a princess. They want to live vicariously through the Disney princess. They want to live vicariously through the lyrics in a song, being a teenage girl and hearing these songs by these men or by these women where they're talking about love and like all the different aspects of love. It kind of teaches you to put love on a pedestal if you grew up listening to a lot of music about love. So what feelings come up when you think about no longer centering men and no longer centering your life around romantic love? What do you feel about that? Do you feel scared? Are you angry about it? Do you feel bitter? Do you feel FOMO? Because for some women, a part of their grief is that they feel FOMO. They feel like they're somehow missing out. Like, oh, I'm missing out on a man telling me he loved me. Like, if you look at some of the femcel content, I'm not trying to be mean by calling them femcells, but I don't know what else to call them. So if you look at some of the femcel content, they talk about how they've never been kissed, or they've never had a man buy them flowers, or all of these little validations, all of these micro validations that they've missed out on. That's FOMO. So a part of why some women are still male-centered into their 40s and 50s, and they're still talking about all this stuff online, is because they have FOMO. They've missed out. They've never had guys buy them flowers. They've never had a guy pay their rent. They've never had a guy take them on a trip. They haven't had a guy give her a gift that's worth thousands of dollars. They've never been gifted diamonds or gold or, whatever their little fantasies are. And so for them, decentering men, it sounds radical because it makes them angry to feel like they will never experience those things. And by the way, you can still experience all of those things while decentering men. I talk about that in the Patreon and on the members page. But yeah, what relations or what emotions do you feel when you think about never being in a romantic relationship again, or when you think about not getting married? What do you feel about that? So I want to talk about cultural and societal expectations too. So like, how has society taught you to prioritize men over other people or experiences? What messages have you received from society about how to interact with men? Because like I said, I've heard people say online that like young women should prioritize marriage above all else. So they should prioritize it more than a degree. And if you waited until past 30, then you hit the wall. So that's another thing too. It's like living your life on a time clock. That is very male centered. I feel like that's definitely a male centered talking point. Oh, you better hurry up and marry a man. You better hurry up and try to catch him now. Gotta catch them all. Try to catch him right now while you're still young. Try to catch him right now while you're still fertile. Try to catch him right now before you get wrinkles. Try to catch him before your metabolism slows down in your 30s and 40s and 50s. So even the timeline or the time pressure or kind of like this idea of checking a box, like, okay, kids, check, marriage, check, being in shape, check, pretty privilege, check. So it's like marriage is another box to check off. Who taught you that? Where did you get those ideas from? Something else you can ask yourself too is like, okay, so who told you that men are more powerful than women? Or like, when did you internalize that idea? That men are somehow more powerful or that they are somehow more of a prize? Who was the first person to even bring that idea to your head? Was it your mother? Because that's a good thing to look at. You may want to look at some of your first feminine role models. Was it your mother? Was it some music artist you used to listen to as a teenager and maybe she was male-centered? I haven't forgotten about Beyonce's Pick Me era. I haven't forgotten about Rihanna's Pick Me era. So those are some examples, or like SZA, Summer Walker. I love all of those artists that I just mentioned, but some of their songs are definitely like pick me music, or it's talking about like side chicks, or kind of dealing with drama with men and then staying and competing with the other woman, kind of competing with the side chick, or the man kind of like dissing her or leaving and abandoning her. So where did you get all of these cultural expectations from? Has your cultural background pressured you into being male-centered? That's something else that can help you overcome the grief. It's realizing that the grief is not your own. The grief from you decentering men is really just your family grieving, saying like, oh, you didn't give me grandchildren. Okay, so that's not your grief to carry. That's her fault for expecting grandchildren. That's not fair, first of all. It's not fair to randomly expect your children to have children just so you can have grandchildren saying, grandma, grandma. That's extremely self-centered. That's not fair. And that type of mindset does not respect the autonomy of your adult children. So I'm just putting that out there. So for some of you ladies who are decentering men, maybe your mother has tried to pressure you into getting married and giving her grandchildren as if you are your mother's womb factory, or as if you are obligated or like you owe her grandchildren. So that's just a cultural expectation. That's actually not even your grief. That's her grief. Maybe you feel like you're disappointing your family by decentering men, by not getting married, kind of not fulfilling their life script that they had in their mind for you. But the thing you have to realize though is like life is your own. It doesn't belong to others. Just because somebody is your mother, it doesn't mean that she gets to control your life. That's also not fair. But you can also ask yourself too, if you're going through a grieving period about decentering men, what exactly are you grieving? What are you grieving the loss of? Because grief, that word, grief and grieving, that word is really talking about losing something. So what do you feel like you lose by decentering men? Is it a loss of identity? Is it a loss of validation? Or is it a loss of status? Because maybe you viewed being a girlfriend as a form of status, and then, being the fiance is a higher form of status, and then being the wife, that is the highest pinnacle of status. So maybe part of your grief is coming from the fact that you feel like you've lost a sense of status because maybe you no longer have the male gaze, or, but on this channel, I do talk about how to still get those things. You actually can still have status, you can still have identity, and you can still have validation from men if you wanted to, as a form of micro validation, while decentering men. The only difference between a decentered version versus the regular version is that you are turning men into kind of this source of micro validation as opposed to major validation. Like, oh my God, I've been looking forward to my wedding since I was 7 years old. Okay, so that means that she views a wedding as a major form of validation because she has spent 20 or 30 years fantasizing about it and planning it. She already knows all the colors, she's already created all these vision boards around it. Okay, so she has shaped her life around it. That would make it a major source of identity for her. But if you're decentering men, you're just making it a micro source of validation. You're making it a micro part of your identity, almost like a sprinkle on top of a cake if you wanted to. Or you can completely eliminate men altogether and be a separatist, as some of the women here on YouTube talk about. They kind of talk about completely separating from men, maybe not even raising your kids with men, not even co-parenting with men, or letting your sons be raised by the father and stuff. So there are all different types of strategies that you can use to decenter men. But if you're going through a grieving period right now, what are you grieving the loss of? What have you lost by no longer centering men? So something else you can ask yourself is, how do you differentiate between the emotional attachment to men as individuals versus societal structures that elevate them? Because I really think that sometimes women put men on a pedestal, not because they actually like those men, but because society gives credit to those men. Or maybe like in your culture, they pedestalize that type of men. Like I noticed in Black culture, in the divestment culture, they pedestalize white men. So the idea of decentering white men, that sounds crazy to you, because it's like, what? So now I no longer get to seek after this status of being a white man's wife and creating these mixed race babies. So how do you know what your emotional attachment is to? What are you attaching yourself to? Or what types of things did you used to look forward to back when you were male-centered? Were you looking forward to the dates? Were you looking forward to romantic validation, such as receiving flowers, receiving chocolates on Valentine's Day, maybe celebrating the holidays, kind of having that romantic holiday vibe with a guy, very similar to Christmas movies? Have you ever noticed that most Christmas movies are like very romantic in nature, very male-centered in nature? It's always like she is celebrating the holidays and then some guy comes and sweeps her off her feet. So you want to look at what you have emotionally attached yourself to in the past. Are you attached to a specific man? Are you super attached to your father and his opinions of you? Or an ethnic group of men? So for example, I heard a lot of Black women talking about how they didn't want to go natural. This is back in the early 2000s. A lot of women were doing relaxers. And then once they found out that, I guess, white men like natural hair, then suddenly, oh, okay, I'm going to go natural because white men like natural hair. Okay, so that's an emotional attachment to the opinions of white men. Random white men on the internet, on YouTube or Reddit or whatever, they get to decide how you look. They get to decide how you look. If that's not male-centered, I don't know what is. Something else you want to ask yourself is, are there any feelings of guilt or shame that you have when you think about decentering men? So do you feel guilty for not wanting marriage? Do you feel guilty for not wanting children? Do you feel guilty for not wanting to sleep with a guy after he took you on a date? Where do those feelings stem from? Who told you or who convinced you that you somehow owe men something? Because that's another thing. You don't owe men anything. You don't owe them sex. You don't owe them a romantic relationship. So where are these feelings of guilt coming from? Where are these feelings of shame coming from? Does it come from the male-centered women in your family? Because a part of my decentering men process was also finding friends who are decentered as well. So finding friends who have their own businesses, their own jobs, their own success, like without a man, that was actually a part of my emotional processing when it came to decentering men. Something else that you want to ask yourself is, what type of healing are you seeking through this whole process of decentering men? Do you want to have a personal sense of healing from this? Or are you just decentering men so you can try to attract a better man? Are you taking back your power? Because for me personally, what I am seeking through my decentering men journey is healing from PTSD that has to do with like I don't know, men objectifying me. As a pretty privileged woman, a lot of you guys know that you have a lot of men chasing you. This could be men hitting on you in inappropriate settings, and kind of all of this mental noise that comes from having an excess of male attention. So I do believe that an excess of attention can cause a form of PTSD because you're hyper visible in the eyes of men. So for me personally, part of my decentering men journey, it's about healing from that, taking back my time and taking back my emotional energy and setting emotional boundaries. So for you, what type of healing are you seeking? Do you just want to have peace finally? Maybe you want to live life on your own terms for once. Maybe you finally want to dress how you want to dress as opposed to only dressing for the male gaze. So something else you can ask yourself too is, how can you reclaim your independence? How can you reclaim your identity as a woman without the influence of men? What does that look like for you? By the way, decentering men is not a monolith. So there is no hierarchy over here like, oh, if you decenter men, that means you have to be gay. Or if you decenter men, it means you have to be celibate. I think that decentering men is going to look different for every woman. And I also think that it exists on a spectrum. So for example, maybe last year you were still dating a lot. And now maybe this year you've decided, okay, I don't want to date at all. So I don't shame women for where they're at in their journey as long as you're on the journey. Anyway, what do you ladies think? Let me know in the comment section and I'll talk to you next time. Stay pretty, ladies.